Okay, well, thanks for making time,
Yeah,
Gary.
absolutely.
I really do appreciate it. I know you're crazily busy, especially in the last few days. So, as you know, I write on the Huffington Post, I write on the Daily Pool, and I kind of represent the blue Republicans who are mostly former Democrats and independents that got the message of Ron Paul and registered Republican to support him. And I'm pleased to say the bulk of them are now supporting you. But I know there's still quite some discussion in the Ron Paul community, the broader liberty movement about your candidacy. So I'd like to just ask you a few questions
Good,
along those lines.
good.
Um, so the first one I want to ask you is, can you please explain why the definition of marriage as between one man and one woman is unconstitutional?
I don't know if I could. I just maintain that marriage equality is a constitutionally guaranteed right, and I would look at that as the Equal Protection Clause, and that it would be on par with civil rights of the '60s. So, if you leave marriage equality to the states, effectively you're saying that nothing is going to change because 42 states have defined marriage as between a man and a woman.
Now, I've heard you say that, but obviously the counter argument is that this, I guess, that in as much as this relates to equality, we are all able to, we're all free to choose to marry according to the current definition of marriage between one woman and one man or whatever. So that, but so what we're really talking about is saying that that definition is in some way inherently unjust, unequal, which is a break from history, apart from anything else. I'm actually with you in supporting marriage equality, but the claim that that the definition is unconstitutional is quite a strong one.
You know, you're the learner. You're the first person that has ever said this to me. I'm going to have to roll it around a little bit.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I will. I will. Hopefully, this is just information only. Is apparently, I'm advocating the fair tax. I am advocating eliminating income tax, corporate tax. Abolishing the IRS, replacing it with one federal consumption tax. If you did that, apparently half the issues that surround marriage equality go away because half the issues surrounding marriage equality have to do with the tax code.
I mean, that's a great point. It would seem that the truly libertarian position on marriage and a truly equal or egalitarian position on marriage would simply be that the government, the law, gives no benefits or penalties based on the choice to marry. Would that be correct?
That would, but what you have right now is you have thousands of lines of federal law that contain the word marriage. And so if you switch over to getting government out of the marriage business, for example, you're literally going to have to change thousands of
Yes.
lines of federal law as opposed to recognizing marriage equality where no lines of federal law would have to be changed.
So really, there's two parts here. There's what we're really saying is we're working in a pragmatic context where the purest libertarian answer just isn't feasible. So based on that, given that context, the equal protection clause applies. Would that be fair?
Well, or believing that the Equal Protection Clause does apply, and that fundamental to being president of the United States, which would be governing under strict adherence to the Constitution, that this would be a federal issue, not a state's issue.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah.
And actually, you mentioned in that answer, Gary, the fair tax. So that's something that I would like to actually ask you about specifically. Now, one or two of my libertarian friends point out that the fair tax really does put government oversight on every transaction, and then by the rebate mechanism, which ensures that you, as it were, get paid back for the effective consumption tax that you're giving to the government for the first whatever $20,000-$30,000 of spending. Everybody is effectively in receipt of a government handout. So you're really kind of creating an entitlement mentality when you're trying to have the opposite effect. How do you answer that? Does that make sense? And how do you respond to
No,
that?
no, it certainly does. And so what I am advocating, learner, is one federal consumption tax. Is the fair tax the best way to implement one federal consumption tax? we could certainly argue, or we could certainly have a debate over whether a prebate is what the FairTax calls it. We could argue, is a prebate the best way to deal with the fact that one federal consumption tax is regressive? It's regressive. It affects the poor or the worst. So the way that the FairTax deals with that is it issues this $200 a month prebate check, which allows everybody to pay for the FairTax up to the point of the poverty level. Is that the best way to deal with the fact that that a consumption tax is regressive? Perhaps not. But back to the FairTax package, I think it's a great starting point for what should be a debate and a discussion over how you make this happen in lieu of having the IRS and income tax and corporate tax.
So what you'd say is the upside in terms of liberty of a consumption tax, for example, the fair tax is so great, but as a matter of principle, you concede the argument that says there is some danger in having the entire population in receipt of a check every year. And that you would be open to discussing that. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Now, I know obviously the biggest area of that I hear discussion about among former Ron Paul supporters with respect to your candidacy is foreign policy. Now, you've said things that sound to me to not be prima facie at odds with a libertarian bent or a liberty bent, but I think there are some people who are concerned that you would be more prepared to put our military in harm's way for what might be called humanitarian interventions than, for example, Ron Paul. So could you please explain, give us the principles based on which a humanitarian intervention you would see as being not at odds with your principles of liberty, your libertarian principles? What are the principles that govern sending our troops into harm's way when we're not threatened? What are the rules?
Well, first of all, that there would be no humanitarian wars. That to me is an oxymoron. That Congress, that there would be congressional approval for any time the military is used. And then if I could just look, I don't think so I don't want to say never.
Right.
And so I don't want to say that if a genocide is occurring somewhere, and it's a situation that we can step in and alter, that we shouldn't do that. Now, if you want to ask for what's the definition of a genocide, I'm going to defer to the Supreme Court justice that was asked about pornography and his definition of pornography, and his response was, hey, I can't give you a definition of pornography, but when I see it, I know that it's pornography. So I can't give you a definition of genocide, but I'd like to think that if I saw it, I would know what it was, and that I think all of us, none of us, want to stand by and watch some dictator in another country line up 2,000 people at noon every day and shoot them all in the head within a 5-minute time frame.
Right.
That to me would be an intervention that could be stopped, given that he's in that given location. This is what he's doing every single day, and I hate to define anything at all, but it could exist, and I don't want to exclude. I don't want to exclude the never.
Sure. Would calls for outside help from the population be a large factor? And also, would you prefer to, as it were, make participation by members of the U.S. military voluntary?
Well, that it would be voluntary, and then when you talk about civilians calling out for help, well, what's the faction calling out for help? We end up. Here it is. We're giving aid to Syrian insurgents right now, and a quarter of the Syrian insurgents are jihadists. Didn't we learn anything when it came to Afghanistan? I just maintain that our military interventions have resulted in tens of millions, hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that wouldn't exist
Absolutely,
but for our military interventions. So stop with the military interventions. Stop.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of people who read my work would not certainly not disagree with that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the spending cut. 43% cut. That would be potentially, let's say, disruptive, especially with respect to the social spending side. So what principles would manage the transition and the impact of the transition? And if you could refer specifically to disabled people who are least able, as it were, to fill in the gap that they would feel financially were certain government benefits to be withdrawn. How can you make people with a more liberal sensibility comfortable with this transition to a Johnson budget and a Johnson world?
Well, first of all, I think that the result of what we're currently doing is going to result in a monetary collapse. And if we just want to look at Russia as an example of a country that has experienced a monetary collapse, let's see, they were in Afghanistan for 10 years. They bankrupted themselves, and shortly thereafter, the end of the 80s, they experienced a monetary collapse. Any of this sounding familiar? They experienced a monetary collapse where one day the ruble was worth something, the next day it wasn't worth anything. The shelves are bare because, you know what, very quickly everybody recognizes that dollars don't buy anything, so you go out and you buy everything that you can while that time remains. That's a monetary collapse. In a monetary collapse, learner, there will be no health care for anybody. That's what we're looking at if we don't fix this. And I think the majority of people recognize that we're in really deep trouble.
I think you would have agreement again from my readers and most of the liberty movement on that. But I want to focus on the transition.
Okay, so in the case of let's take Medicaid and Medicare. I think that the federal government needs to get out of the healthcare business completely. As governor of New Mexico, I oversaw the reform of Medicaid, healthcare for the poor. We took it from a fee-for-service model to a managed care model. We saved hundreds of millions of dollars, and we set up a better healthcare network. Learner, in my heart of hearts, if the federal government would have block granted the state of New Mexico 43% less money, done away with all the strings in the mandates, in my opinion, I could have effectively delivered health care to those that are poor, truly in need. Now, that would have involved drawing new lines of eligibility.
Okay.
I maintain that same template for Medicare, health care for those over 65. New lines of eligibility, and that we really do want to provide a health care safety net for those that are poor, for those that are over 65. So when you talk about this disabled individual, I'm in the camp that really believes that there are those that are truly in need and that really do need help. But I think we've stepped way over the line with regard to those truly in need. And let me back up to Medicare. Medicare is a system, is a program that you and I end up putting $30,000 into in our lifetimes, and we now end up getting back $100,000 benefit. By extension, whatever we put into Medicare, we get 3 times the return relative to what we're putting in. That is unsustainable. That's the reason why we're in the shape that we're in, which is really bankruptcy. So devolve all this to the states. 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice. 50 states are going to draw new lines of eligibility. 50 states are going to come up with some fabulous success that'll get emulated. There'll also be some horrible failure that will get avoided. But one size doesn't fit all, and that's what the federal government has done.
And so in the states taking this over, as it were, taking back their own money, you're not concerned that there would be a year as these laboratories, as it were, try and sort out how best to solve this problem. That in the first year or two, there may not. That you're not worried about the degree of chaos that might ensue that would affect certain people.
Well, certainly. I mean, that would be one of the fallouts. But compare that chaos to no health care at all. And now I'm talking about a monetary collapse. And for those that want to believe that we're not going to experience a monetary collapse as a result of what we're doing, I think by extension, what's Santa Claus bringing? What's the Easter Bunny? What color eggs are coming? The Tooth Fairy. How much money are they going to leave underneath the pillow? Look.
I hear you.
They're not going to come with the rest. We're going to do this.
Gary, could you move back a little bit, because I can see your mouth and the bottom of your nose very clearly, but not your eyes or the top of your head. Beautiful, thank you. That's much better. Yeah, right. You look much better when you're all there.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Right. All right. Okay, I hear you. Now, do you have any guiding principles for legislative compromise? Let's say, for example, that you had to work with the Senate that was going to stop you doing that, and you could bash out a compromise where rather than a 43% cut, you could get a 23% cut. But maybe you could block grant back the money that wasn't cut. Would that? Yeah. How would you affect compromise?
The notion of never say never. I would never say never. During the Republican debates, they asked a question, and I was not in this debate, but they asked a question: would you accept a 90% cut in the deficit for a 10% revenue increase? And every single Republican answered that they would not accept that compromise. Well, I was shouting, yes, of course,
right.
I'd accept that. You're talking about a 90% reduction in the spending deficit, the offset, and you're talking about a 10% revenue enhancement? Come on.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Right. So with respect to guiding principles for legislative compromise, I guess you would say common sense. Would that be a fair summary?
That would be a very fair summary, yes.
Okay. Now, one thing...
And just trivia, that was my running for governor of New Mexico. So what I said was, let's just bring a common sense business approach to state government. Best product, best service, lowest price. Let's keep government out of the bedroom. Let's not allow government to make decisions that you and I should be making.
Okay, absolutely. Now, one thing I'm very interested in, because I'm very interested in kind of the dynamics of the liberty movement and the change in the zeitgeist in the United States. In the political zeitgeist, could you explain specifically what it is that this magic number of 5% actually gets the Libertarian Party and the liberty movement in general?
Yes. This is more than a general statement. It probably applies to the vast majority of states. But number one, ballot access issues go away. 5%, and no longer does the Libertarian Party have to spend time and money, which right now, most of the time and most of the money of the Libertarian Party goes toward ballot access. And that's the fact that I'm on the ballot in 48 states. Big deal. 49 states when you count Michigan. Also, 5% is the magic number when it comes to federal matching funds, which for the Libertarian Party would be an absolute game changer moving to 2016. Lerner, right now my second campaign for governor in New Mexico, 1998, I spent $3 million, which was a very cheap governor's seat nationwide. I'm sitting here right now. We've run a nationwide campaign that arguably right now I'm in the 5% range. We've spent $2 million relative to Obama and Romney, $2 billion. You can do the math. 1/1000th of what they've spent. So when you talk about $5-6 million, $7 million in federal matching funds, that's a game changer right out of the box.
So I see I'm pleased to see that the Libertarian candidate actually gives you more bang for the buck.
The Libertarian, come Tuesday, I would be willing to bet you anything right now that when you divide the votes by the money spent, on the bang for the buck. Any want to be a taker on that one?
That sounds good to me. I wouldn't bet against you. I wouldn't bet against you on that. So now we're talking a bit about the The party. One thing that I'm quite new to the liberty movement. You can tell from my accent that I'm even a little bit new to the United States.
You know what the accent does? It's just very calming. The accent is wonderful. I mean, I can see you get in a lot of doors with just the accent.
Well, maybe I'll consider a career in politics in that case. But I just wouldn't be allowed to be president, not having been born here. So I'll cross that off the ambition list. So one thing that interests me kind of coming into the American political scene is it seems, and the basis for a lot of my work is that it seems to me that libertarianism has a branding problem as a philosophy, and the Libertarian Party has a branding problem as a party. Not least because I believe you're broadly correct when you say that most Americans are instinctively, fiscally sensible. They are socially tolerant, and indeed, this is a nation. The Constitution here behind me. It's a classical liberal nation. It's a small L libertarian foundation. So, given the match on issues and on basic philosophy, why this consistent, let me just say, failure of the Libertarian Party to break out, and why has Ron Paul been able to create something that the LP hasn't been able to create for many years? What do you think that's all about, and how do we change it?
Well, first of all, I think you're right on with what you're saying. The best a libertarian candidate for president has ever done is 1% of the vote, and that was 1980. That was Ed Clark and David Koch. I think we're going to knock the cover off of that this go round, and you're at the crux of why hasn't it caught on? Well, maybe it's the candidate. Maybe the time has finally gotten here. But what you're talking about is the goal come Tuesday is a recognition that the Libertarian Party really does stand for something. And the definition of the Libertarian Party really is up for grabs. I mean, when you talk about 1% is the best the Libertarian Party has ever done, man, that's a marketing problem that the Libertarian Party has had.
Do you think that that's to do with a certain purism in the libertarian movement? Purism, perhaps, rather than just principle?
I think it's just just an awareness issue that for whatever reason it hasn't really clicked, and that now it is clicking, and you can point at Ron Paul as having led this. And does it grow from here? Absolutely. I mean, I'm part of a snowball here rolling downhill. Whatever measurement that snowball is come Tuesday, it's not relative to where it's going to be 6 months, 6 years from now.
It seems that the branding of Gary Johnson and the Gary Johnson campaign is better, is slicker than anything I've seen. I mean, I'm not an expert here, but that I've seen coming out of the Libertarian Party beforehand. Does this represent a potential change in direction and branding of the Libertarian Party?
I don't want to, for a second, say that I want to change the direction of the Libertarian Party as much as I do to be able to communicate libertarian ideals and beliefs. And I'm also a pragmatist. Look, I think libertarians need somebody that can articulate getting from A to Z. But you know what? If G is achievable, how about it? Let's get there.
And would you say that sounds like a way to make libertarianism, liberty, a big tent political philosophy, which I guess is the way you win in a democracy? Are there any other things that the liberty movement broadly needs to be doing to make its tent bigger and bring more people into it?
I think it really is just an issue of awareness. That you mentioned it earlier. The majority of Americans are fiscally responsible. They're socially accepting. Lerner, I don't use the term tolerant because tolerant somehow infers to me that, I don't particularly like what you're doing, but I tolerate what you're doing. I think most of us don't care. I'm in the camp that doesn't care as long as what you do with your life doesn't adversely affect mine. So I really think that this is just awareness, and I think people perhaps right now are more aware than they've ever been before. And
what was it that Ron Paul did that hadn't been done before that made all the difference?
he somehow he tapped into it, but this is what I've noticed throughout my political career. And by the way, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but I had no prior political experience, zero, prior to becoming governor of New Mexico. And so all I've witnessed is just a heightened support, if you will, for talking about these issues. And I think these issues are absolutely liberty issues.
And as part of this, it sounds like what you're saying is the most important thing is we just get more Americans exposed to our ideas, that it's a numbers game, as you say, an awareness.
So you can run for political office because you do a really good job of boiling it down to just some very accurate words.
Okay, well, if I need some tips, I'll be calling you. I might need a consultant. Maybe I'll run your VP as your VP. How about that? Maybe later. Maybe. Well, actually, tell me, what are your plans? If you don't win the election, what would be your plans for the next day and the next 4 years and the next eight years?
Well, I think the last thing that anybody wants to hear from somebody like me is, "Hey, I'm gonna. Here's what I'm gonna do." I think everybody's ready to puke by the time that the election is over. I hope to remain a spokesperson for these issues, but as far as talking about plans, like I say, I'm more turned off than anybody when it comes to politicians that start talking about next cycle before this cycle's even over with.
Right, that sounds like a healthy psyche, which probably commends you to the presidency, I would say. So now, with respect to strategy and the expansion that we want to see in the movement, and more electoral success among libertarians and liberty lovers generally, how grand a strategy would you consider electorally? For example, a number of people who I speak to who have come to Ron Paul from the left, because we've all had our conversion experience into the modern kind of liberty movement, some from the neocon, Republican right, some from the, progressive Democrat left, whatever it is. But some have said, look, why don't we just start cutting deals with the Greens? Why don't we say, we'll support you, Green candidate here, you support us here, because frankly,
I got the answer.
Let's hear it.
Well, so the Green Party wants to have the government take over the internet. I mean, come on. This of course. There's no compromise.
There's no. Okay. Now, would that mean then? So I had a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question actually at the end of this sheet of paper, which was, if you had to choose to live in a Jill Stein world or a Barack Obama world, which would you pick?
I wouldn't be picking either one. I got to be honest. I would abstain from voting.
Right.
I would for the Libertarian candidate, and that happens to be me. But I know the Libertarians are going to always field a candidate, and that candidate's going to be. Now, I will tell you, last cycle I did not vote for Bob Barr. I voted for Chuck Baldwin. I did debate Bob Barr in 2000 on drug policy at the Republican National Convention, and you know what? I'm glad that Bob Barr rolled out of bed and hit his head at some point in his life and became libertarian, but I'm grateful for that.
Okay, so what about, so Jill Stein and the Greens is a step too, I guess many steps too far. What about a strategy that involves, and I don't even know if this is kind of practicable, you can tell me, an explicit support for liberty candidates in the GOP, in the hope of getting support maybe from state parties or county GOP, whatever, for libertarian candidates maybe at lower electoral levels.
Lerner, having been in the GOP, I've heard some very disparaging things said by not the majority of Republicans. I am not speaking now on behalf of the majority. Behalf of the majority of Republicans, but I've just heard too many disparaging things said about gays. I've heard too many disparaging things said about immigration, the illegal immigrant.
So are you saying that
rights? I just there's an intolerance that exists among a 20% faction of the Republican Party that I've never found to be acceptable to me, but that's the beating your head up against the wall trying to change the Republican Party.
Well, there's no doubt, I would say, that is true. But there are also, I mean, Ron Paul ran as a Republican. I mean, there's the Blue Republicans, a liberty organization. We've endorsed a Libertarian endorsed candidate in Tennessee, Sean Crow, but also John Dennis, who's running against Pelosi in California, because, of course, part of the decision of which candidates to support is not always just the position of the candidate you're supporting, but how bad is the candidate that you're running against. You know, and you take someone like John Dennis and Nancy Pelosi, there's a lot of clear blue water there, even though, for example, John Dennis isn't running as a Libertarian, he's running as in the GOP. Now, the fact is there are many people in the GOP who are quite deliberately wanting to reform it, to change it back into a party that was closer to its founding principles, perhaps, to make the lack of tolerance not characteristic of the GOP moving forward. And indeed, the liberty movement in the GOP are the under 30s. A lot of them are the same people that will be voting for you. The future is those younger people who are more like us than the intolerant, outgoing GOP types. Would you not support them in breaking and reforming the GOP as it is?
Well, when you say support, if you're talking about voting for one of those individuals over a libertarian, probably not. If you're talking about voting for one of those over a Democrat, yes, absolutely.
Okay, but you see no future in electoral deals that where you vote for this GOP guy in one county and if some GOP officials in another will support a libertarian candidate as being truer to supposedly Republican principles of small government, civil rights, and these kind of things.
Well, never say never. I think that the Libertarian Party right now has an opportunity to supplant one of the two major parties here.
Okay, and so what happens next? Let's say you get your 5%. I think this is a good place to end. What next for the Libertarian Party and the Liberty movement? Where do we need to really push our energy? Where do we concentrate?
Well, and let's just say it isn't even a 5%. Let's just say whatever it's at, that it crushes the 1% best showing. Right now, in the pipeline, when you talk to individual states in the Libertarian Party in all the various states, right now there's like double, triple the number of candidates in the pipeline that are wanting to run as libertarians next cycle. Now that's something that's happened, and that's real. So it's growing. We'll see where it ends up. Like I say, 5% is a game changer because of ballot access and matching funds. But less than 5%, okay, so the Libertarian Party has to continue to spend money on ballot access, maybe raises more money. It's not the end of the world.
And what about getting into the debates with the Republicans and the Democrats?
Nice. So, if 5% gets achieved, 4%, whatever it is gets achieved, what gets achieved is a lot more attention that is drawn to the libertarian movement, to the libertarian candidate in 2016, and potentially, more than just potentially, that candidate could be at 15% approval and have a ticket into the debates. And if that happens, Katie bar the door. Anything can happen.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that I think people with politics, like yours, like ours, do best when we're in a room against the Republicrats and everybody can see that they're cut from the same cloth, just wearing a different color tie. So I think you'd have trouble finding any American that wouldn't like to see another voice represented, and certainly one that has the principles that you have. I know that's true for me. And I was delighted to see the Free and Equal organization, get you guys on the stage. And obviously, you came top in the in the vote for the best third party candidates. Although I like to call you the second party candidate because, of course, the first party is the Republicans. So actually, as far as I'm concerned, you're already the second party candidate. So I wish you well. But Gary, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. And I know that the people who listen to me and read my stuff will be very pleased to see this interview and hear what you've had to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And like I say, with that accent, for me, it's like music. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You have a great evening. Thank you, Gary.
All right. Bye.
Bye.